Good evening. On behalf of Cook County Department of Transportation and Highways Superintendent Sis Killen, I would like to welcome everyone to tonight's virtual public information meeting. So tonight we are going to cover the Sauk Trail feasibility study. This is, I believe, the third meeting in a series of meetings, this time virtual. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and we look forward to talking to you about the Sauk Trail corridor.
Okay, my name is Chloe Meek. I'm a senior PM with Morreale Communications, and we have the privilege of working with the Department of Transportation, Highways, and also this project team to help facilitate public meetings regarding this really important project. We do want to point out that this meeting is being recorded and that participants will remain muted. We ask that you please type your comments, questions, concerns into the chat box, not the Q&A box. We will answer your questions and comments at certain points throughout the presentation. We'll take breaks to address as many questions and comments as we can. If we need to move on with the presentation and do not address the comment that you have entered into the chat, there will be time at the end of the presentation where we will go back through and answer anything that has remained unanswered, and of course give you more opportunity to ask additional questions or make additional comments. If you would like to speak, please use the raise hand button. If it's not along the center bottom of your Zoom screen, you may need to go to the more button with the 3 ellipses. Sometimes it hides under there, but rest assured we will see that you have your hand raised, and if we are able to stop the presentation to address your question, we will.
Hi, Bennett Haller, also like Tara with Cook County Department of Transportation and Highways, or DOF. With me also is Joe Seymour, who will be doing the lion's share of talking shortly. And you've already heard from some of our consultant team, but with us is our Jesse Carroll, Colleen Jost, David Steinberg, and Chloe Meek. And with that, Joe, take it away.
All right, thank you, Bennett. So here's our roadmap for today's virtual meeting. We're going to be first talking about our project context. Where is this project in Cook County and why specifically are we looking at it? And next, our consultant team will then pivot to existing conditions, talk about the project goals for this study, and then we'll be getting to get more of your feedback on the community considerations. What destinations or assets do you want to try and access or see improved through this study? And then we'll talk about potential improvements through the lens of a design toolkit. And finally, we'll talk about a project timeline and how a feasibility study fits within the larger phase study structure, as well as outlook for construction and these types of things, just understanding where this all fits in the greater timeline. And then at the end, as Chloe mentioned, we'll have opportunity for open discussion. And that's where if you have questions that you'd like to ask audibly, we can go off mute and have the discussion there. All right, well, we'll move into the project context. Next slide. Advance one more. So this is our project area. It's the Sauk Trail, Southern Cook County. There are 2 segments of Sauk Trail that we're looking at specifically. So the corridor that we're reviewing is 4.1 miles from western to central, as you can see there. And there are 2 segments, one primarily, one in Richton Park, and the second segment in Park Forest. Now, why are we here? Well, the organization, the South Suburban Mayors and Managers Association, submitted a STP shared grant application to look at all 14 miles of Sauk Trail to look at improvements. This was a community-driven grant application. Now, we at the county, because this is our roadway of jurisdiction, we're looking at specific chunks of Sauk Trail and how can we evaluate the needs and transportation challenges of these segments and address them in a thorough way as well as in a manageable way. And so again, we're looking at this 4.2 mile segment between Western and Central. Next slide. Now, whenever we approach projects at the Department of Transportation Highways, we approach it through the lenses of safety and complete streets. Now, safety, we're looking at safety for all road users. That's people walking, biking, using mobility devices, as well as driving and using transit or trying to access transit. For complete streets, you may have heard of that phrase before. Complete streets means that we approach designing a roadway for all of its road users so they can access the facility safely. So that, again, that means for pedestrians, people bicycling, transit users, we want to make sure they can use the corridor in a safe, efficient, and predictable manner. And again, we're looking at this through the lens of all modes. Next slide. Now, one specific objective we're looking at for this study is the provision of a low-stress bikeway along Sauk Trail. As you can see through the image on the left and on the right, in South Cook County, there are very few east-west low-stress bike corridors. Many of you may bike or walk on the Old Plank Road Trail. Well, we look at Sauk Trail as an opportunity for an east-west bicycle corridor that can also be used by pedestrians, such as a shared use path or multi-use path. Now, our bike plan that was published last year had a goal specifically of all residents in Cook County being within 1 mile of a low-stress bikeway. Now, what's a low-stress bikeway? It's something that whether you're 8 years old or 80 years old, you feel comfortable using. And when we design for a low-stress bikeway, we're going to make sure that the majority of people are going to feel comfortable using that facility. Low-stress bikeways are also connected, and so we're looking at how would a facility along Sauk Trail or other facilities within Richland Park and Park Forest connect together to build out a network of low-stress bikeway facilities across South Cook. Another thing we understood through looking at the bike plan for the county last year and this study is that Sauk Trail has already been identified by the villages of Park Forest and Richland Park as a corridor desiring bicycle and pedestrian improvements, whether that's in the Richland Park Town Square Plan or in the Park Forest Active Transportation Plan. This is something that the community they've already identified for improvements, and we're looking to get a better sense of what are the challenges to improving this corridor so it supports all users safely and comfortably. Next slide. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Jesse.
Thanks, Joe. So this project kicked off at the beginning of 2024, and our first step was to develop an existing conditions report. So what we did was we compiled all the existing condition data that we could, including land use data, traffic volumes, crash data, utility information, environmental resources. We reviewed existing reports, studies, and planned projects in the corridor. We also took inventory of the existing infrastructure during our site visits and reviewing aerial imagery. What we found was along the corridor, the typical section for Sauk Trail consists of 2 lanes in each direction with additional turn lanes in different configurations throughout the corridor. Some locations there's median 2-way left turn lane. Other locations have pocket turn lanes with mountable median islands. But generally there are 2 lanes in each direction through this corridor. The apparent land use changes along the corridor between Richland Park and Park Forest. In Richland Park, it's more of a mixed variety of land use, whereas in Park Forest, it's more residential. So as we develop our recommendations for this corridor, we're going to keep those differences in mind. This is an example of the 2-way left turn lane in the median and the more residential cross-section of Park Forest. The heat map shown here highlights where crash locations are concentrated. The red bubbles are those locations which are mostly at major intersections. The corridor for vehicular crashes mostly has rear-end crashes and turning crashes, which can be attributed to speeding, congestion, and the like. The hotspot locations for vehicles and pedestrians are similar. This heat map shows the bike and pedestrian crash locations, which are concentrated around Governor's Highway and also Latonia Lane, which is a more residential and community services location with the schools and the the library and the other community buildings. So we're focused on improving the safety at these intersections when we make our recommendations, which we'll discuss further along in this presentation, some of the possible options that we can implement. So next slide, we recognize that the Richton Park Town Center plan was just completed, and it describes the vision that the community has for the town center, centralized around the metro station to provide a safe corridor and town center. Our recommendations in this stamp study will complement the recommendations in this Richton Park Town Center plan. So after this slide, we're going to open for any discussion and address any comments that you may have at this point.
Great, thank you, Colleen. So we do have one question so far, and that is from Ms. Kelly Smith. She is asking how this initiative will impact motor traffic, particularly in peak hours.
Hi, Kelly. That's a good question. Now, at the moment, we don't have the results of a traffic analysis done, and that's because we haven't put forth, let's say, alternatives or design improvements for the feasibility study. So we don't know the impacts of what improvements could be because we haven't identified those yet. We're not at that stage. We haven't identified those improvements yet. We're still at the listing stage, identify what those improvements are. And so as we're going through the presentation today, if there are comments or questions about improvements to the roadway that may, let's say, have an impact on motor vehicle traffic or congestion, we'll take those ideas in and evaluate them as part of the next stage of the project. But we don't have any results yet to share.
If I could just add on, Mr. Smith, apologies for that incorrect address previously, but I just want to follow up on your question. So primarily, the purpose of this study is to look at moving more than just cars. We want to move bicyclists and pedestrians safely and efficiently through the Sauk Trail corridor. So the goal here would be to look at ways to safely do that. We expect that impacts during the peak hour would be minimal, but again, where we're kind of at right now is to get a better understanding of the needs that have to be addressed. And as the study evolves, I think we'll have a better handle on any roadway or traffic congestion peak hour questions.
We
Okay,
do
and
have
then there's
one additional question from John, who is asking if Sauk Trail will be widened to accommodate a safe bike and pedestrian pathway.
So I'll take it to begin with, Joe. Sauk
Okay.
Trail is wide enough as it is. We've got plenty of pavement out there, and I believe the hope is through the roadway corridor that utilizing some of those existing pathways, perhaps the sidewalk could be widened to accommodate bicycle traffic more efficiently, right, Joe?
That's correct, Tara. One of the things that we're looking at, as Colleen, not Jesse, mentioned as part of the existing conditions, is that there are a number of there are things that we call constraints on the side of the roadway that that could have an impact on if you're going to put things above the curb, like a sidewalk, if you widen things to a side path that you want to avoid that can make it really challenging. For example, like cemeteries, like land uses like that, make it really challenging to place anything near them, as well as utilities relocation. So these are all things that we look at above the curb to determine where these things could fit within the existing footprint that DOTH that the county maintains. So what we don't know yet, but one of the things we look at through these studies is how can we meet the needs of the communities with while trying to minimize impacts. All right, Chloe, I don't see any other questions at this moment, so we can probably
Thank
proceed to
you
the
for your
next.
questions. Yeah.
Love it. Keep them coming, folks. This is why we're here tonight. Thanks.
Great. And with that, I am going ahead and take over. I'm Jessie Carroll, and I'm going to talk through pretty much the rest of this presentation. So we're going to start off with the project goals. So we kind of talked through some of this just in that discussion, but really I want to emphasize that the team is really looking to understand what the communities want out of the corridor along Sauk Trail and how really you want this corridor to look and feel. We talked about, the wideness or the current footprint of Sauk Trail. What speed would we like to see motorists travel? Where would we like to see, where would you like to see pedestrian and bicycle accommodation and connections? And then really to identify any locations and types of improvements that would improve or meet those needs. As Tara had mentioned, really this is focusing more on looking specifically at pedestrian and bicycle. We call them vulnerable road users. Pedestrian bicycle mobility through the corridor and making sure it's safe and efficient. So as part of that, that's really kind of what our focus is here and how to make those connections and those improvements so that it does meet those goals. Another thing that we are documenting is also just any additional comments that we hear. We've already had 2 of the in-person meetings. We've met, with the council to talk through what the communities themselves at the leadership level are looking for, and taking those improvements also into account for future implementation when that comes along. So I do want to make note of that up front. But as part of the study, we will be documenting all these findings that we hear, collecting all of that and including in some of our recommendations. So we talked a little bit about this up front, but we really did we talked about the existing conditions, we kind of talked about the goals, and now really what we are trying to identify and keeping in mind are community considerations. So I'm going to walk through those. So we have a few of these opportunities or considerations that we have been including in how we're looking at any improvements that we make along Sauk Trail. So one of those particular considerations is destination access. Colleen talked about what we saw in the existing conditions, the types of land uses that are along the corridor. Richton Park is a little bit more retail and commercial development, where on the east end of the corridor in Park Forest, we have more residential uses. So along the whole corridor, how do we make sure that any improvements that we make are really understanding where travelers are trying to access, and then really how much access should be accommodated off of Sauk Trail? Again, kind of focusing on those vulnerable road users, how do access points, driveways, how does that impact movement for those vulnerable road users? So just something we're considering as we work through some of these recommendations. Another piece of that community consideration is the larger transportation system access. So really we're looking at key transportation links. We have the metro station over by Governor's Highway. How do we improve that efficiency and the mobility of that transportation system and that connectivity? We also have bike lanes and shared lanes on various routes, Latonia Drive or Latonia Lane and Blackhawk Drive. And then also neighborhood cut-throughs and other bike path connections in the vicinity of Sauk Trail. So all these things we're trying, any improvement we would make to a sidewalk or a side path, making sure that those connections are meeting up with these key locations. Another piece that we did look at, and Colleen touched on this, was really the environmental impacts. We did look through the area for wetland areas, special flood and hazard areas. We looked to identify any endangered or threatened species within the corridor, and there was no finding of critical habitat during our initial review, so that's good. We also looked at sensitive land uses, recognizing that there's cemeteries in the corridor, there's parks, recreation centers, schools. And so as part of all that, we did, we're including this in our write-up. Cultural and historical resources were also reviewed as part of this high-level impact consideration. And then one of the last things we looked at really was the right-of-way impacts. We've talked a little bit about the footprint already, but as we look to possibly expand or widen sidewalks as potential safety improvements, looking at those pinch points. There are several of these pinch points throughout the Sauk Trail corridor in the areas of Richmond Park and Park Forest, including, we'd mentioned just recently, cemeteries on that last slide, kind of gated area, kind of squeezes in, again, another just narrowing of the sidewalk, narrowing of that pedestrian area. And then also near the metro station with the viaduct, again, a limited space for pedestrians and bikes to get through there. So trying to maintain or understand how to make those connections and improve, keeping in mind those pinch points and recognizing possibly improvements to other sides of Sauk Trail as necessary to accommodate that wider walkway, if that is in fact a recommendation. So with that, we have another discussion slide here. So I will open it up, turn it back to Chloe, if we have any additional comment.
So we don't have any additional comments at this time. My colleague did just drop in a message asking that everyone check that when you are inputting a question, just make sure that the drop-down menu in your chat box is listed to everyone, not just hosts and panelists, and that way everyone who's participating can see, especially if we have any repeat questions. We just want everyone to see what everyone is asking. But we don't seem to have any additional questions at this time. So with that, I think we can probably continue on with the presentation and continue taking questions at the end.
Great. Thank you very much, Chloe. And then I saw you pop in, Joe. Did you have anything you wanted to address?
Well, I was just going to mention for those, if you're wondering, like the types of community considerations that we heard during the first two in-person meetings, if that may trigger, like maybe encourage some other comments. We heard quite mostly community considerations about trying to reach the Walmart. People want to reach there on foot, or neither their workers trying to reach the Walmart and wanted to have some sort of infrastructure that's supportive of that. We heard considerations, some questions about parking availability along the corridor on the side streets. We also heard a lot of concerns about safety along the corridor, not so much trying to reach destinations, but how some of the turning movements of vehicles and the speed of vehicles on Sauk Trail discourage people from trying to cross the road to reach destinations, reach other neighborhoods or other trails, and that those themselves, the road itself was a barrier in its existing condition. So as you're thinking about over the next couple slides before we open discussion, think about those things that you're trying to reach along the Sauk Trail corridor, that the roadway itself or conditions may be a barrier, or the absence of bicycle and pedestrian path may prevent you from getting somewhere that you really want to go, or the other members of your family or community want to reach. All right, I'll hand it back over to Colleen and Jesse.
Great, thank you, Joe. Okay, so the next slide going to, based on the type of community input regarding the needs that we've heard, again, from those in-person meetings and from the advisory council, we did start to look at what types of design tools we could implement along the corridor to better meet some of those needs. And Joe just kind of ran through some of those that we had heard from the previous in-person meetings. So I'll jump into it here. One of the design tools that we identified was providing a green median. So Colleen walked through the cross sections, particularly on the Richmond Park side, where there's that mountable curb that you can actually cross over and use. Again, some of the two-way left turn lanes in the Park Forest section are used, maybe not necessarily for turning, but could be used as passing. So putting in something like this, the green median, could be, eliminate the opportunity to use the median and center and left turn lane as a passing lane. Putting in the green median also has, typically slows vehicles down. It creates more of a boulevard feel. And, this is not a new design. We do have this right on Park Forest section. If you look on the left side of the screen at Indian Wind Boulevard, there's an example of that. There's also opportunity, and there's some additional examples, but we can still maintain those left turn pockets at the intersections. So it's not something where there'd be no access to the opposite side of the street, but that we would, provide that access as necessary. And what this green median also does is it does create a two-stage crossing for pedestrians, meaning that they can leave one side of the road, get to the center, and they've got a refuge there. So it's a little bit safer, makes them a little bit more comfortable, and allows additional spacing for vehicles to pass and allowing some additional time for gaps and not being stuck in the middle in a two-way left turn lane. So this is an option, something to be considered as we move forward. A lot of what we had heard from those in-person meetings was related to pedestrian crossing times and more visible crossings for pedestrians as well. So these examples here really kind of show some of the options that could be considered for Sauk Trail, showing speed feedback signs for drivers. You know, sometimes people just don't realize how fast they really are going. So this can notify them and cause them pause to recognize how quickly they're moving and hopefully slow down, improving safety for our vulnerable road users. And then I'd mentioned the more visible crossings, and a little bit in the bottom right corner, you can see, you know, high visibility signs. There's a refuge island there in the middle, allowing again that pedestrian crossing time, a little bit of break in the traffic. So implementing some of these things, more prominent striping. We show an example here of a hawk signal or a mid-block crossing, allowing people to push a button and get some attention, you know, allowing drivers to recognize that someone's trying to cross the street. So again, this was a lot of that information that we did hear coming out of those meetings. We also talked about even improving or adding additional crossing time for the ped countdown heads, as you can see in the upper right corner, providing a little bit additional few seconds more to allow pedestrians to have enough time to really cross the street based on their speed. And then the piece that we have been talking about is really looking at a multimodal side path. So this is an option, you know, to widen the sidewalk on either side of the corridor. This is really something that we're going to be looking more into after we get feedback from these meetings to recognize, you know, we're going back to those community considerations. Where are people really trying to access as destinations? Where are those pinch points that we may have to, you know, alternate the side of where this multimodal side path is, recognizing that we need to improve even ramps to accommodate all users, wheelchairs, strollers, and the like, to allow them to cross the streets as well and make that a little bit more safe and more efficient for them as well. So again, this is just another tool in the toolbox, but something that has been very successful in other implementations. So I know we have just a couple more slides here, so I'm just going to jump into the project timeline, and then we can talk more about any questions you might have on the design toolbox. So currently, Tara had opened it up mentioning that we are in the feasibility study phase right now. So in the center of your screen is really where we have been and where we're moving towards. We started back in February of this year with the existing conditions report. We did perform a field visit in the spring. We had our advisory council meeting also late spring. We had our in-person, and now we're in our virtual open houses during this fall and a little bit late summer, early fall for the in-person. And then moving forward, we're going to be looking at alternatives development, really trying to look at the improvements that make sense for the needs that we've heard through these outreach sessions. We'll be pulling that all into a final report later in the fall. We will host another advisory council meeting with more of the executive members of each of the communities to provide what we've, you know, summary of what we've found out in these outreach sessions, and then, you know, getting their feedback as well. And then we'll roll that all into a final report submittal that'll be coming late this year or early next year as we progress through the updates. So that's it. That's where we are right now with the feasibility study. On the left side of the screen, you'll see that really this goal of this study is to identify these concepts to carry forward. These alternatives will be further refined in the next phase of the project as it moves along. And then here we kind of outline what those next phases look like. So the typical durations for each of those, we say phase one is really more the NEPA phase. It's more the conceptual design phase. And looking at the environmental factors as well. That tends to run about 18 to 24 months to get through that phase to create a document that has recommended alternatives. The phase two is really the design phase. That runs about 24 to 36 months, depending on how much, you know, if there's any additional communication or coordination needs to happen with different agencies. So that's typically 24 to 36. And then the phase 3 is the construction phase. And that runs usually about a season or two, 12 to 18 months. So that's kind of the outlook here for the full project into implementation on the left side. So that's kind of where we are now. And this last slide is really just to open it up for discussion. So I'll go ahead and do that and turn it back over to, yep, thank you, Chloe.
Of course. So we did get a couple of questions come through from Mary in the Q&A chat. So we have moved those over into the general chat. So Mary first asked, she says she lives on the north side of Sauk Trail. How much of her property / parkway is she going to lose?
So I can start. You know, the goal of this study is to work within the limits of the property that Cook County already owns. So we call it right of way. And so I'm going to turn to my team real quick here. This corridor itself, too, what is the length of this study for Sauk Trail?
So the corridor is 4.2 miles long.
Yeah, so 4 miles. Yeah, so for 4 miles, but the existing right-of-way limits vary throughout the corridor, but the intention is that we work within the limits of the property owned by Cook County. So Mary, I'm not sure about the specifics, but the intention would be that we would avoid or minimize any acquisition. Unless, is there any, Mary, do you want to expand upon that? I hope I answered your question.
I think we can also mention this opportunity to describe like typical sidewalk widths and shared use path widths, so we understand what we're talking about dimensions wise. So the project team, CM Smith, if you can back me up, the sidewalk that's in the that's on both sides of the Sauk Trail for almost the entirety of it is typically 5 or 6 feet wide. Is that the base dimension?
Yep, that's correct.
And when we talk about a side path or a shared use path along the roadway above the curb, we're typically looking at sometimes as narrow as 8 feet. So you're looking at a 3 foot difference. Sometimes if you have a higher use, you're expecting more people to use it, you can go to 10 feet or 12 feet. That would be unlikely in this type of corridor. Usually those wider side paths are much more busier
Quite
corridors.
a lakefront, right, Joe?
Yeah, lakefront, exactly. They can fit more people for a wider path. So you're typically looking at 8 or 10 feet as that range. So if your sidewalk is typically 5 to 6, in order to accommodate more people and to make it lower stress, you typically would move up to 8, 9, or 10 feet.
Right. So in essence, thanks, Joe. In essence, we're looking at a 2 to 3 increase of the existing sidewalk width, and that's really to allow 2 bicyclists to be able to pass each other on that pavement. And then there's another question from Mary about green medians, how we're going to access our driveway. Again, Mary, the corridor is over 4 miles long, but we do hope that we can incorporate, to the extent that we can, some of those green areas that were described by our team. Joe or Bennett, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah. So in terms of the toolkit, a green median or a raised median also has primarily safety benefits. So one of the things that we added to the presentation after our 2 in-person meetings a couple weeks ago was we wanted to describe all vehicle crashes. So something that green medians one of the things one of the immediate benefits is safety for motorists. Along the corridor, there are a lot of crashes at a couple key locations. A number of the crashes that are occurring, high frequency crashes, are these turning vehicle crashes as well. And when we're out there doing site visits, we saw people driving over the painted median or the corrugated median, passing people in the turn lane to get ahead, and that's an unsafe behavior. And it's something that a raised median, when applied in the right location, can help. What raised medians also do is if someone's going to cross the roadway, if it's at an uncontrolled or an unsignalized location, we have other things to make the crossing safer. It's enhanced. The addition of a median can allow people to cross 2 lanes of traffic, wait until it's clear again to cross the other 2 lanes instead of having to run furiously across Sauk Trail, which is challenging and highly unsafe. So it'll benefit both motorists and pedestrians. Now, the question about vehicle access, typically medians will have brakes in them to allow you to do a U-turn to access your facility. But again, that's not as part of this listening stage of the project, that's not the primary focus, but we are trying to understand what are the safety issues. And so that's where the raised median or the green median comes up. It can be a tool to both help people cross the roadway and people driving more safely access access their destinations, as well as reduce some of those risky driving behaviors where people are driving over the median to access properties. We had a related question about crossing times. Chloe, I can just go to that one. So from John, increasing times across Sauk would be great. Would the plan include retiming existing traffic signals? We do not cross across Sauk Trail during weekdays because of safety concerns. So John, we heard that same comment during our second public meeting in Park Forest, specifically that the walk time was not long enough to accommodate people with slower walking speeds. Either you're walking with children, or if you have had a hip surgery, or you're just walking more slowly, we want to make sure that the timing reflects the people who are using the corridor. And that's something that we're paying attention to, and that can be addressed through signal timing. So it's something we're aware of and we're going to look at as part of this feasibility study, because we're looking at both supporting traffic movement along Sauk Trail, but also crossing Sauk Trail. All right, Chloe, I'll hand it back to you.
Okay. We do have another comment from Mary. She's saying that she lost 28 feet when the street was widened the first time. How are you going to deal with the sewer, water, gas lines? She is across the street from a gas station.
Okay, so for that, I don't know, Tara, if you want to go, or if the project team want to talk about how they look at utilities as part of the data collection.
So I guess just first and foremost, thank you for your question. The road, we have plenty of roadway pavement out there. What we're looking at now is how to move bicyclists and pedestrians, non-motorized traffic, more safely and efficiently through the corridor. Some of the questions that are coming up in the chat that Chloe has mentioned ask about specific impacts, and we are not ready to talk about those at this time. What we really are trying to get a handle on is, where are people going? Where are those pain points? Where is it difficult for you to cross the road? So we could identify what some countermeasures are and what some proposed improvements would be in order to help making that happen. So we do not have specific answers, because if we go thinking back to when Jesse finished up the at the schedule in the end of the presentation, this is just a study. This is not a phase one. This is not construction drawing preparation. The county is very far away from turning dirt to make this project go forward. This is a study that will inform future capital project expenditures by Cook County. The purpose of this outreach is to understand the needs of the community in terms of what has to be addressed. And with regards to utilities or the loss of parkway space, again, we are hoping that there's plenty of roadway width out there now. Our intention is to work within the limits of what is owned by Cook County already, to the extent practicable. And then, Chloe, I see the question about increasing times to cross Sauk Trail. We did bring that back to our team as a result of our last meeting. It looked at a handful of through the village of Park Forest. We use a crossing time of about 3.5 feet per second. 3 out of the 4 signals that we looked at were appropriate for the average pedestrian to cross the street. But I do understand, with it being a 5-lane roadway, in terms of comfort level, there's folks coming at higher speeds from different directions. And you know, it is a challenge with getting across such a long distance. So, but we absolutely will be looking at timing for pedestrians for that interval for them to cross the roadway. I'm going to
Great.
turn it back over to you, Chloe, to get some.
Sure. I don't think we addressed this one. John made a comment that a big part of the problem is excessive speeding. Have the villages acknowledged their role in fixing this?
I cannot answer that directly. This question did come up during our park forest meeting, where park forest staff mentioned had a question about enforcement. How are they allocating traffic enforcement resources to park forest? And this is a question that we're going concern that we're going to relay back to the villages during the next advisory committee meeting. But the response at that time was, you know, the village is trying to allocate its enforcement, its public safety resources, and that that includes roadway. And at the time they're dealing with staffing or capacity issues, and that they're trying to balance between other needs in the village, and traffic enforcement at that time may have not when they were able to allocate resources. But again, this is very fluid, and we're bringing this up to the village's attention, which I'm sure they're aware of and are addressing. But that'll be something that we're going to be flagging as part of the next advisory committee meeting.
Great. Cynthia Burton Pete would like to know when a foot traffic count could be done to determine if a bike path is even warranted.
If I can go, Tara, that's fine.
Yeah.
So we do take counts for transportation projects. Oftentimes we'll take a speed. We'll do a speed study, look at how vehicles are traveling on the corridor at different times of day. Also do traffic counts. As part of every traffic count, we always count for bicycle and pedestrians. It's county policy that helps inform our planning. But one of the things we're aware of when it comes to looking at our bicycle and pedestrians there now versus will they be there if we build a low stress, comfortable, safe, accessible facility. That's often very challenging to do looking at existing conditions, because as we heard through the open houses, people like going on the Old Plank Road Trail because it's a lovely low stress facility that it's higher quality. Whereas if you look at Sauk Trail as it exists now, you're not going to see many people walking or biking alongside of it because the facility may not be comfortable. Roadway speeds along Sauk Trail contribute to that higher level of stress, and it may not tie into the existing bicycle facilities in Park Forest or the planned ones in Richmond Park. So we know that people are using Sauk Trail. We also understand its role in the providing a bikeway network east-west. So we try to understand what are the barriers existing now to be having a low stress, comfortable bikeway facility, and what would a proposed facility do, and where would it connect? And that's what we try and look at. We know a low stress facility that's in an area with homes and schools and businesses that's connected will see use as well. So we don't have any existing counts now. We do have modeled estimates of what we think people are using, and we may have to look at historical counts as well. But what we try and emphasize is facility low stress? Is it connecting to where people want to go? And then we know that people will use it once it's built.
Okay. Kelly had the comment that on the park forest portion of this section, installing bike lanes raise more questions than solutions. Kelly, I'm not sure if there's any specifics or examples that you would like to add to that, but perhaps I'll just turn it over to the project team to discuss their thoughts on that in the plan.
Certainly. So when we look at the type of roads that the county maintains, many of them are higher speed, higher volume, multi-lanes. And when we look at the context of bicycle facilities, and oftentimes the thing that best fits again, the widest range of users in a safe manner, in a low stress manner, is something that's going to be above the curb. So, every there's a context appropriate bicycle facility for every roadway, and for these higher speed, higher volume ones, oftentimes it's going to be separated above the curb. An on-street bike lane would not be adequate for a facility like Sauk Trail.
Okay.
And our apologies if some of the pictures in the PowerPoint presentation may have confused the intent of what we're really trying to brainstorm and be creative and thought-provoking in terms of our conversation that we're having now. But to echo Joe's point, no, there will be no bike lanes on Sauk Trail.
Okay. Well, we don't have any additional questions or comments at this time, so might be good to just give folks a moment to answer any final questions or comments that you may have so that the project team can go ahead and address those for you.
And I would just like to point out, our existing conditions report is located using this QR code or going to the Cook County stamp website. So just since it's been up here for so long, I'm not sure that we really pointed that out. I know we mentioned it earlier in the presentation, but just taking this opportunity. So feel free to visit us. And comment period, I think Chloe will close in a couple weeks.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
All right, question for Cook County team. What are some of the comments, if we go to the project website here, what are some of the comments and feedback that we've already gotten? Or what information are we looking to receive from, if we tell all our friends and neighbors about this study, what kind of feedback do we want to get?
We're interested in where you want to connect to. So for example, when we're looking at this from a corridor perspective, specifically from bike ped, if there were a side path on the north side, the south side, that's going to be important to know what do you want to connect to, because that may play a role into whether facilities on the north side or the south side, as well as where we'd want to focus on crossing improvements at the signalized intersections or other places. We also want to know your safety concerns. Where do you not feel safe crossing, driving, turning along Sauk Trail? Because as we're looking at this corridor, we're going to look at crossing opportunities. We're going to be looking at signals. We want to be able to gather this feedback to hand off to the next Cook County project team as they look at the next phase of this project should it proceed. So we want to know safety. We want to know where you want to go. We also want to know preferences as well. Like if you have any preferences about side paths or crossing opportunities, or just other other improvements, or maybe there's a new park that's going in a Richton Park. We want to know that. Or if there's something that you haven't seen in our existing condition summary, it's very important to understand, and like an overlooked issue. Sometimes we can have blinders when it comes to such a local context, so want to help us understand things that you haven't seen described in the study yet.
Okay, we did just get a couple more comments. So Mary has said, are the green medians going to be just grass?
And to that, I would say too early to tell. This is just an item that's in the toolkit that's been used on Indian wood. So it's something that to consider as a reference point, but we have no idea.
Okay. And then Stacy says, as a homeowner on Sauk Trail, I understand lowering the stress for non-motorists. However, as a motorist, that raises our stress backing out of our driveway is a challenge already. What warnings, if any, will be given to these non-motorists?
Oh, I see. In terms of people biking or walking along the side path and in conflicts with driveways. Well, typically when a side path approaches a cross street, there can sometimes be a stop sign for the user to stop before crossing the side street. In terms of signage or warnings, Tara, I don't believe there's anything that's additional. We do look at visibility though, of users on the side path, for example, things that can act on obstructions that can reduce the person on the sidewalk or the side path, their visibility of conflicts. But Tara, is there anything else that's typically done?
Right. No, I don't have anything to add, Joe. Bicyclists or pedestrians would not be moving any faster than those vehicles that as you back out onto Sauk Trail. So it would just be something, a new element to exercise caution with when backing out of your driveway.
Okay. Can you please tell us again when the public, I think she means the public comment period will close. I'm just confirming that now, and I believe it is next Wednesday. The next Wednesday would be the 30th, October 30th.
So go ahead and I'm not going to close my inbox immediately on that day, maybe on Halloween. But we're going to be taking these comments in and as well, even post comment period, we're going to be meeting with the advisory committee over the next couple weeks. So that's kind of a soft deadline as they come in. We're logging them, reviewing them, and then and using those questions for our next stage of the planning study.
Okay, Dawn Marie is saying, I have a concern about privacy, having a bike trail or walking path that close to my front door, living on the north side of Sauk Trail.
Okay, thank you for sharing your concern. So again, we're early in the stage about whether the a side path would be, which side it would be on. But again, this what we're looking at within the existing footprint that the county maintains, this would be likely in the location of the existing sidewalk. So you know, this would just be for the same location and same users. So if concerns exist now with people using the sidewalk, I imagine they may extend to a widened facility, but it wouldn't necessarily change the type of users.
Okay. That's the last of the comments that we have at this time. Oh, Stacy, will homeowners / car insurance be affected due to a greater risk of an accident?
So in terms of the study, the overall goal of the study is to accommodate bicyclists and pedestrians who are already using the corridor in a safer and more efficient way. So in terms of risk or accidents, that question is, I would say, speculative, and any crash that happens, it depends on following the rules of the road and the specific incidences at the time that something happens. To the question, I see the question about the Old Rich East site. We did talk about that at the Park Forest public meeting, and I believe that property is still owned by the school district. So the county's role in that would be to work with the adjacent property owner outside of the Sauk Trail corridor to provide to access points and the connection to Sauk Trail. So we do not have any jurisdiction regarding that site and its future uses for the old school. Thank you.
Okay, we'll just give this a minute in case there are any additional Additional comments? From Mary, how much impact do our comments have on these plans?
I'll start and maybe Joe can answer. I think that right now there is no plan. So they have a big impact on informing the recommendations of this study. Joe?
Right. And I mean, we know what we know from some of the publicly available data, such as the utility locations, some of the environmental screening we do, and talking with municipal staff. What we lack is the understanding of the concerns of the the residents in the nearby neighborhoods, other community concerns, and so when the questions come in about, let's say, parking availability or safety or risk, or concerns about tree preservation. These are all things that we make sure we stop in the project team. We understand what the question is and try and see to what extent our recommendations or the alternatives that we're developing address that issue. Is that issue prevalent? And so we address all of these concerns through our evaluation of the options in the document. So without your questions, we don't necessarily know if that's a concern that we need to further look into and address. So participation and questions, either in support or of a curious nature or of a criticism of an idea, those are all valid, and we address those as we move forward in further investigating what options look like in terms of improving low stress travel options through Sauk Trail.
John Marie has another question. Is there any consideration, excuse me, in the village of Park Forest letting us widen our driveways onto our front lawns so we can actually have a turnaround? Right now, we're limited to 22 or 24 feet wide, and that's it. Anybody who has a safety concern, if they were able to widen their driveway, they would have more of an option to be in agreement with the path.
Noted, and we'll share that with the committee. That hadn't been mentioned in one of the earlier meetings, so we'll bring that to the attention or question to the next advisory committee meeting.
Yeah, and I think that that's subject to local ordinances and zoning requirements. So, but yeah, any information that wouldn't be on the county's plate to handle, we can certainly work with Park Forest and Richmond Park on.
Okay. Well, we are at time, so I would invite everyone present to definitely visit the project website shown on the screen in front of you. You can also use your phone to scan the QR code. That will also take you to the project page where you can submit comments and read more about this phase of the study. And I will hand it back over to the project team for any closing comments.
Okay, well, with that, I want to thank you everyone for their participation today, for offering your questions and your comments on the Sauk Trail All Modes feasibility study. Again, the comment period is open for the next week or so, but I put my email in the chat, so please, if you have questions, concerns, or you want more information, email me at joseph.seymour@cookcountyil.gov, and we will log your comment or try and address your concern. And we will be coming back. We'll be posting the plan or the study findings and recommendations later in the springtime, and we have our next advisory committee meeting later this fall and early winter. So thank you all again for your participation tonight. If you want to share this recording with others, we're going to have it posted in the next couple weeks, and you can encourage viewing and further questions there too. So thank you, everyone, and this concludes the session tonight.